May 24th, and it's finally starting to get warm enough outside that we can start thinking about putting our warm crops outside, like tomatoes, peppers, corn, some of these kinds of things. Here in Logan, Utah, we usually look at Memorial Day as kind of the trigger date for when we would start doing these things. Next Monday is Memorial Day, but we've been having some really nice weather, and so I think in the next couple of days I'm going to start putting some of my things out in the garden. In some of our earlier segments, I have mentioned about the greenhouse, and we even came down here and looked at the greenhouse a few weeks ago, but I wanted to show you what's been going on in the greenhouse during these weeks while it's been cold and stormy outside. And so let me just grab the camera here and I'll show you what's been going on in the greenhouse. I mentioned previously that we only heat one end of our greenhouse, so this area that is being heated and growing in is 20 feet by 18 feet. So you don't need a large greenhouse to get a lot of things in here. Let me show you a little bit of what's in here. This right here is some large baskets of petunias that we'll be moving up to our house. Here's some of those tomatoes that I showed you in part 1 of this series. These tomatoes are about 3 feet high now, and there's actually little tomatoes down inside there. I oftentimes am eating tomatoes by Memorial Day weekend. This year I don't think I'll quite be eating them, but I will have tomatoes. Over here we have more tomatoes. We have squash, watermelon. This is an annual huckleberry. Back there in the back is some cabbage, some cosmos, some marigolds, zinnias, cucumbers, squash. This rhubarb is quite impressive. I don't plant that every year, but I planted that on February the 7th, and you can see how big it is. Coming around over here, we've got some basil and another pot of petunias, some of our leftover onions. I do a lot of cuttings, and some of these cuttings, they don't look so good, but they will usually put out some new leaves and look better here in a few weeks. I've got grape cuttings. Here's some green beans. Here's some of the geraniums that I showed you in part 1. They're all blooming now. Coming over here, we have a lot of peppers. These were the peppers that I showed you in one of the segments that I was putting up into the 6-packs and into flats so that we could bring them down here. More marigolds. This is some decorative pepper. Some coleus back here. Here's some snapdragons. These are the tomatoes that I also showed you in one of the other segments. Over here is more cuttings and grapes and squash. I've got some hanging baskets in here that we will put around our yard. So you can see that even though we had a really long winter and kind of a late start to our growing season, that we've got a lot of things going, and we're going to start putting these out into the garden in the next few days. So we will look for you again in the garden. Today we're going to plant our green beans. Green beans come in 2 different kinds. You can do a bush bean or a pole bean. The actual bean itself at harvest time is about the same, whether you grow a bush bean or a pole bean. The bush bean grows on a plant about 1 foot to 1.5 foot high, and they have a heavy crop on them. The pole bean grows up a fence or some kind of a string that you put. I like to use these cattle guards here and plant them on that, and they'll grow up that. I like to do the pole beans myself because they're easier to pick. I think I get a better crop off of them, and when they get to the top of this, then they will just either hang over and continue to fruit, and I get a nice crop that way. With the bush bean, it seems to me that I have more trouble with bugs on it, and it's a little bit harder to bend over to pick the bush bean. So for this reason, I like to grow the pole bean. I've had a little bit of trouble with my beans when I plant them, that I have bugs that either eat the the seed before it sprouts or right after it sprouts, they will eat it. So I have started planting mine down in the greenhouse. I'll just plant up a flat like this, and then when the fear of frost is over, I'll bring them out and plant them out, and I've got a little bit of a head start on the season that way. So when I plant these, I'll just pull the plant out. Sometimes the roots on here is getting a little bit thick on there, so I'll just take and break it up a little bit like this, and then I'll put it in the hole. You don't need to have the beans very close together, so on this cattle fence, what I'll do is I'll just go every other one and plant a bean, and then I'll go to the other side of the fence and put one in between each of those, and that way I've got a nice thick fence of green beans, and I'll get a great harvest off of these. So I'll get back to you in just a minute after I've finished planting these and show you what it looks like. I finished planting the beans. As you can see, we've got a nice row here now with plants on each side of the fence. So these should grow up to be a really nice row of beans. I planted these beans in the greenhouse on April the 27th. Today is May the 26th, so we have about a month that we gained by planting these in the greenhouse versus just planting seed in the garden. You'll also notice in the background the peas are coming up really nice that we planted a while back. Today we're going to plant our tomatoes, our peppers, and our vine crops. The vine crops include the cucumbers, the squash, and the melons. The way I like to plant these three different things is I put them under plastic, or plant them in plastic. And so the way I do that is I will take and dig about a 1 foot wide row. I'll dig down each side and mound the dirt up in the middle. And then I'll pull the plastic over top of that mound. This serves several purposes. First of all, it warms the soil up so that the plants will get a better start. And then it also holds the moisture better, so you don't have to water as often. And then the big thing is that it makes a weed barrier and keeps the weeds out from the plants. So I'll show you how I do this plastic. The plastic that I use is a 6mm plastic, and I buy it in a large sheet and then cut it down into 3-foot pieces. So these pieces are 3 feet wide, and I'll take and I'll just roll it down the row. And when I get it in place, then I'll come along with the shovel and I'll just shovel it over the top like this. And do that on both sides. Shovel that on both sides, and then I'll go along and make holes in the middle here and put my plants in those holes. So what I'm going to do is, now that I've shown you how I put this in place, I'll go ahead and get it all in place, and then I'll show you how it turns out. We got the plastics down now and the edges buried. This plastic, as I mentioned, is a 6mm plastic, and we cut it to 3-foot strips and lay it down here and then cover the edges. This is new plastic this year, but you don't have to always buy new plastic. Our old plastics have been working for probably 10 or 12 years, but they were getting pretty ratty, so we decided it was time to replace them this year. Now what we do is we cut a hole in this plastic where the plant is going to go. This first row to the right is where our peppers will go, and we've cut a hole every 1 foot. Now usually you plant peppers about 18 inches apart, but I like peppers so well, and I have so many different ones I want to plant that I need to crowd them up a little, so we put ours every 1 foot, and it seems to work well. This middle plastic, we've cut the holes at every 2 feet, and that's where we will put the tomatoes. And then the row here on the left is where the vine items will go, like the cucumbers and the squash and melons. And we've cut our holes at every 3 feet on those. This is the peppers we will be planting. We only have 72 holes, and we have more than 72 peppers here. But the kinds that we'll be planting this year are California Wonder, Guajillo, Jalapeno, Chili de Arboil, Gypsy, Large Emerald, Big Red. I don't know, maybe I forgot one. But this is what we'll be planting. We'll show you how we do that here in just a moment. Okay, we're planting our peppers now. The way I do this is I'll just fold the plastic back, dig a hole, take a pepper, break up the roots a little bit, stick it down in there, snug the dirt around it, move to the next one, dig the dirt out, break the roots up a little, put it in there, snug the dirt around. Now, one thing that's important about this is if you're doing multiple kinds like I'm doing, make sure you put your stake in there so you know what kind of a pepper that it is, or tomato, or whatever plant you're planting. So this is our peppers. We won't make you watch all of them, but that's how we planned them. This is our tomatoes that we're going to put in now. And we'll plant these every 2 feet in the plastic. The varieties that we have here is Thessaloniki, Beefsteak, Big Beef, Celebrity, Bonnie Best, Early Girl, Oregon Spring, and that might be all of them. So we'll be planting these right now. When planting the tomatoes, I plant them a little deeper than they are in their 6-packs. You can see that they're just shallow. They've got a lot of roots, so they need to be broken up. I also pinch off these lower limbs on them, and that gives them a little better start. So I dig the hole a little deeper than what the sill is, put it down in there, and pack it around. Now with the tomatoes, I like to have them in a cage. I make my own cages. I just use, this is for cement construction. It's what they put in the cement for reinforcing, and I just cut them and roll them up, and they make really nice tomato cages. So after I get it planted, I just shove that down in there, and that makes a nice cage. It holds the tomatoes up off the ground. They're easy to pick. And then I'm ready to go on to my next one. Again, remember to dig the hole a little deeper than what the plant is. If you happen to have some plants that are really getting leggy and long, you can dig the hole even deeper and just plant it up here deep, and they'll set roots all along that stem. So tomatoes can be planted deep. They like that. So I put that in. Snug it down a little. Put a cage on it. So that's the way it is, and we're looking forward to eating these tomatoes in a few weeks. Well, we finally got to our last row. It's been a big day doing all this planting, but we're now on our vine things, which is our cucumbers and our squash and cantaloupe and melons and that kind of thing. With these items, we've got them every 3 feet apart, and I like to put 2 plants in each of the holes on these. It represents a hill more that way. So I'll take out 2 of these. If they're too root bound, I'll break them up, but these are about right. So I just put them both down in there, work the dirt around them, firm it up a little, and come to the next one. Now, it's obvious, I guess, that with all of these things that we've planted, after we've planted them, we need to water them good so that they'll take off. This right here that I'm planting is actually zucchini, and down at the other end I was planting cucumbers. But these will take off. We'll be eating some zucchini probably in about a month. So it's been good to be with you today. We've had a big day and got a lot planted. So thank you, and see you on the next item. Today we're going to do our final planting in the garden. Today we're planting our sweet corn. Sweet corn is one of our family's favorite things, and so we plant 5 or 6 rows of sweet corn usually. I've kind of settled on 2 kinds that I like. I like one called sugar bun. It's a little smaller ear, but it is so sweet and delicious. It makes my mouth water just thinking about it. The other one is an ambrosia, and that is a bicolor corn. Some of the kernels are white and some of them are yellow, and it's a really good corn also. The sugar bun usually comes on about a week earlier than the ambrosia. So I usually plant them at the same time, and then this way it staggers the harvest just a little bit. Now this year, I've mentioned earlier in the video about the hard winter that we had, but after winter ended, we have had a wonderful spring, and it was a warm spring. And so I took a gamble about 3 weeks ago and planted 1 row of corn here, and you can see that it has come up really nice and is looking good. I usually don't plant my corn until around Memorial Day, and yesterday was Memorial Day, and so we're planting our corn today, but our gamble got us about 3 weeks early on that, so we're looking forward to that. When I plant my corn, when I was a kid growing up, we used to use a shovel. Let me show you how I would do that. We just take the shovel, pull it back, throw 3 or 4 kernels in, move about a foot, pull it back, throw 3 or 4 kernels. So this is the way that we always did our corn growing up. Now, after I got older and started my own garden, I didn't always have a large garden. I used to have just a small garden before we moved here. And so in the smaller garden, I would just use the little garden spade and basically do the same thing as the big shovel. I would just come along, dig a little hole, put 3 or 4 kernels in, go about a foot, put 3 or 4 kernels. And actually this method is how I planted this row, and you can see how nice that row came up. Now, as I got this bigger garden, I got a little garden planter that has worked really well. With this, you put the seed in there. You can change the wheel for different crops, but I've got the corn wheel in there. And what it does is, as it goes, it'll drop the kernels down through this little chute here and makes a nice row. So you just have to walk along behind it like this, and you can't see it on the camera, but I can see it down in the chute. About every foot it drops a few kernels, and so that's the way that it plants. Now, I flood irrigate my garden, and so what I did before I started this morning is I made furrows where each of my rows of corn are going to be. So I just have to follow along those furrows with my planter, and it'll plant, and then in about a week the corn will be up. Now, as I mentioned, this is our last crop for the season. I appreciate you following along with us in how we planned our corn, and we are going to close this video on how we plant at this time, and then I will do one later on in the summer as we start harvesting things, and we'll show you how we harvest things. Now, I would like to just close this video by saying the way I grow my garden may not be the right way, may not be the best way, but as my title says, this is the way I grow my garden. So I hope that you have learned some things from the way I plant my garden, but remember, this isn't the only way to do it. There are many other ways. So thank you for watching, and we will see you at the harvest.